Family, let me tell you something today. When God has his hand on a woman's life, nothing in hell, nothing on earth, and nothing in the past can stop her destiny. You see, when God fights for you, he doesn't just defend you. He elevates you. He vindicates you, and he positions you for victory. Some of you have been through storms, rejection, battles that should have broken you. But the fact you're still here is proof that God's hand is mighty on your life. When a woman's faith stands tall in the fire, it means she does not allow adversity to shrink who she is or who she believes her God to be. Fire represents trials, hardships, betrayal, sickness, financial strain, and the storms of life that press against the human soul. Most people, when the fire gets hot, bend under the pressure. They lose hope. They lose courage. They lose sight of God. But the woman God is fighting for has learned that faith is not about the absence of fire. It is about the presence of God in the middle of it. She refuses to let the flames intimidate her spirit. Instead, she uses the heat to refine her trust, to purify her motives, and to strengthen her walk. She understands that trials do not come to define her. They come to refine her. This kind of faith is not weak or wavering. It is the kind that says, even if I don't see the way out, I will stand on what I know about my God. Think about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fiery furnace. They told the king, we know our God can deliver us, but even if he doesn't, we will not bow. That's the kind of unshakable faith this woman carries. She doesn't just believe God for the outcome she wants. She believes God because of who he is. And that makes her dangerous to the enemy. Because when the devil can't shake her trust in God, he can't control her future. Now, faith that stands tall in the fire doesn't mean she doesn't feel the heat. It doesn't mean she never cries, never feels weary, or never wonders why. It simply means that in those moments of weakness, she runs to the one who is her strength. She has learned to worship through tears, to pray through pain, and to praise through problems. She's not standing because the fires is easy. She's standing because her God is faithful. Let me give you a simple example. Imagine a single mother working 2 jobs to keep food on the table. Every bill seems to come at once. The kids need new clothes. The car breaks down. And she feels like she is drowning in pressure. On the surface, it looks like she should crumble. But when people see her, she's still speaking words of life. She's still praying with her children before school, still thanking God for his daily provision, still refusing to give up. She might not know how every need will be met, but she knows who her source is. That's faith standing tall in the fire. That's a woman God is fighting for. This faith is also contagious. Others who see her wonder how she keeps going when the weight is so heavy. They may not realize it, but her endurance is preaching louder than words ever could. She becomes a living testimony that God is real, that he is present, and that he honors those who trust him. She may not even know how much she inspires others, But her fire, forged faith, becomes a beacon of light for those walking through their own flames. And here's the beauty. When the fire ends, she doesn't come out smelling like smoke. She emerges stronger, wiser, and more resilient than before. The very thing meant to destroy her ends up developing her. That's why faith standing tall in the fire is one of the clearest signs God is fighting for a woman. Because the fire may burn, but it cannot break her. Her God won't allow it. When God fights for a woman, even her enemies become instruments in his plan. The very people who set traps for her end up laying the path for her to rise higher. This is one of the most powerful signs of divine favor. The weapons formed against her may be real, but they cannot prosper. Instead of crushing her, they carve out a platform for her destiny. Opposition becomes opportunity. Betrayal becomes breakthrough. And rejection becomes redirection. You see, the enemy is clever, but he's not sovereign. He can launch attacks, but he cannot control outcomes. The God who fights for her knows how to flip the script. What looks like harm in the moment becomes help in the long run. When people gossip, slander, or plot against her, it may sting, but it doesn't stop her. In fact, it pushes her closer to the God who works all things together for her good. She begins to realize that enemies are not just irritations. They are confirmations. They confirm that she carries something valuable, something worth fighting against. And if her enemies are working overtime, it means her calling is about to break forth in ways she never imagined. Think about Joseph in the Old Testament. His brothers hated him, threw him into a pit, sold him into slavery, and tried to erase his destiny. Yet those very actions escorted him to Egypt, the place where God would elevate him to second in command. His brothers meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. That's the pattern God still uses today. He can take the sting of betrayal and turn it into the seed of blessing. For the woman God fights for, enemies are not final, they are functional. They serve a purpose greater than themselves. Now let me give you an example you can picture. Imagine a woman working in an office where her coworkers constantly undermine her. They spread lies to discredit her. They exclude her from conversations, and they try to sabotage her projects. At first, it feels unbearable. She prays, she cries, and she wonders why God would allow such hostility. But instead of retaliating, she keeps her integrity. She keeps showing up early, doing her work with excellence, and trusting God to be her defender. Eventually, her boss notices that despite all the opposition, her work shines above the rest. When a leadership position opens, she is promoted. Not in spite of her enemies, but because of them. The very attacks meant to destroy her highlighted her character, her consistency, and her resilience. Her enemies ended up being the reason her light was seen. This is the way God operates. He doesn't just silence enemies. He uses them. He uses them to sharpen her, to prepare her, to elevate her. Without Goliath, David would have remained just a shepherd boy. Without Pharaoh, Moses would not have become a deliverer. Without Haman, Esther's courage would not have been revealed. And without opposition, the woman God fights for would not fully discover the strength inside her. So when her enemies show up, she doesn't panic. She doesn't waste energy trying to fight back in her own strength. She lifts her eyes to heaven and remembers that the battle belongs to the Lord. She trusts that every arrow thrown at her will boomerang back as a blessing. She may walk through seasons where it looks like she's surrounded, but in reality, it is her enemies who are surrounded by the hand of God. At the end of the story, those enemies who tried to bury her realized they were actually planting her. They thought they had written her ending, but God was only turning the page. Her enemies, without knowing it, became her stepping stones into purpose. And that is one of the clearest signs that God Himself is fighting on her behalf. When God fights for a woman, her prayers are not whispers lost in the wind. They are declarations that shake the very atmosphere. Prayer is not a ritual to her. It is a weapon, a lifeline, a direct connection to the throne room of heaven. When she prays, she is not just reciting words. She is pulling on divine power, releasing God's authority into earthly situations, and shifting realities that seemed unmovable. Her prayers have weight because they are fueled by faith. And faith-filled prayers reach into the unseen and bring down what is already settled in heaven. You see, a woman who prays is a woman who fights differently. She doesn't need to use manipulation, intimidation, or fear. She drops to her knees and wages war in the spirit. She knows that while the battle may be visible in her circumstances, the real fight is spiritual. And because of that, she calls on the name of the Lord, believing that no demon, no chain, and no stronghold can withstand the power of a praying woman. Her words may sound quiet in a room, but in the spirit realm they are thunderous. Angels move at God's command. Barriers break, and blessings are released because she prayed. Prayer doesn't just change things around her. It changes her. When she enters God's presence, her anxiety turns to peace. Her fear turns to courage. Her despair turns to hope. Sometimes the miracle is not in the answer, but in the strength God gives her to keep going until the answer comes. And because she has seen God respond before, she doesn't doubt that He will do it again. Her history with God fuels her boldness in prayer. She doesn't pray weak, timid prayers. She prays prayers that expect heaven to intervene. Let me give you an example. Imagine a grandmother who has a son lost in addiction. On the outside, it looks hopeless. Rehab has failed. Friends have walked away, and even the family has given up. But every morning, that grandmother kneels beside her bed, calling His name before God. She asks for protection, deliverance, and transformation. She keeps praying even when nothing changes. She keeps praying when years pass by. Then one day, seemingly out of nowhere, her son walks into a church service, encounters God's presence, and is set free. People say it was sudden, but it wasn't sudden. It was the result of years of prayers, shaking the atmosphere until the chains broke. That's the power of a woman whose prayers won't quit. The woman God fights for knows that prayer is not just asking. It's aligning. It's not begging. It's believing. She knows that when she prays, she's not trying to convince God to act. She's agreeing with what He has already promised. And because she prays with authority, she leaves no room for doubt. Her prayer life becomes the secret place where victories are won before they are seen. Her enemies may try to silence her, but they can't stop her prayers from reaching heaven. Circumstances may try to discourage her, but they can't rob her of her faith. When she lifts her voice in prayer, she shakes her household, her community, and even her generation. The atmosphere shifts because heaven responds. That's the unmistakable sign that God is on her side. Her prayers are not just words. They are fire, and they set things in motion that no force of darkness can stop. When God fights for a woman, one of the clearest signs is the peace she carries that simply does not make sense to the world. People look at her life and see situations that should have broken her, storms that should have drowned her, and losses that should have crushed her spirit. Yet instead of collapsing under the weight, she walks with a calmness that seems unexplainable. That kind of peace is not natural. It is supernatural. It doesn't come from her circumstances being perfect. It comes from knowing the one who is in control of the circumstances. It is the peace that passes all understanding, the kind that guards her heart and mind when everything around her looks uncertain. The world tells us peace comes when bills are paid, when relationships are thriving, when the future looks secure. But this woman's peace doesn't depend on any of that. It is rooted in the unchanging character of God. She has learned to say, even if the storm rages, my God is still good. Even if I don't have all the answers, my God is still faithful. That assurance is what gives her the ability to walk through chaos without falling apart. The people around her might panic, but she doesn't, because her anchor holds firm. Peace like this confuses those who don't understand it. They expect her to lash out in anger, to spiral in worry, or to break down in despair. But instead, she smiles, she speaks life, and she carries herself with quiet strength. It is not denial. She knows exactly how serious her situation is. It is not pretending. It is believing that God is bigger than what she's facing. She can be calm in a storm because she knows who calms the storm. This kind of peace is powerful because it doesn't just hold her together. It becomes a testimony to others. People who watch her wonder, how does she do it? How can she stay steady when everything around her is shaking? They may not realize it, but they are witnessing God's presence in her life. Her peace becomes an invitation for others to seek the same God who gives it. Let me paint a picture for you. Imagine a woman sitting in a hospital waiting room, her child in surgery after a terrible accident. Family members are pacing the floor, Some are crying, others are making frantic phone calls. Yet she sits quietly, whispering prayers, her face calm, her spirit steady. A nurse notices and asks, "How can you be so composed?" She answers, "Because I know who's in that operating room. My God has never left me, and he won't start now." Hours later, when the doctor comes out with good news, her peace is proven right. Even if the outcome had been different, her trust in God would not have shifted. That is peace that doesn't make sense to the world, but it makes perfect sense to heaven. The woman God fights for doesn't walk around free from troubles, but she does walk around free from torment. Worry doesn't rule her heart because she has surrendered control to God. Fear doesn't dictate her decisions because she has decided to trust him. Even when the world shakes, she remains still because she knows her shepherd will lead her beside quiet waters. That kind of peace is not fragile. It's fierce. It refuses to be stolen by circumstances and refuses to bow to the noise of the enemy. And that is the undeniable sign that God's hand is on her life. Her peace is not her own. It is God's gift to her. And when God gives peace, no storm, no person, and no devil in hell can take it away. When God fights for a woman, one of the clearest signs is that her purpose cannot be denied. No matter how many people overlook her, underestimate her, or try to block her, she cannot be hidden when God has chosen to use her. Her life has divine fingerprints all over it. People may say she doesn't have the right background, the right education, the right connections, or the right appearance. But God says she has exactly what he needs. Human rejection does not cancel divine selection. When God calls her, no person, no system, and no circumstance can erase her assignment. Purpose has a way of breaking through pressure. It may take time. It may involve setbacks, and it may include seasons of silence, but it will prevail. A woman walking in divine purpose is like a seed planted deep in the soil. The dirt may cover her, the darkness may surround her, but eventually what's inside will push through. God does not waste pain, delays, or detours. Every tear, every disappointment, every locked door becomes part of the shaping process that prepares her for what is ahead. This woman doesn't chase titles. She follows God's voice. She doesn't try to force opportunities. She trusts the Lord to open the right ones. That's why, even when doors slam in her face, she doesn't despair. She understands that rejection is often God's redirection. If a door is closed, it's because it wasn't her door. If an opportunity passes by, it's because God has something greater in store. She doesn't waste energy begging people to see her worth because she knows God has already stamped her with value. And here's the truth. When God says yes, no one can say no. The woman God fights for may be overlooked by man, but she is handpicked by heaven. David was ignored by his own father when the prophet Samuel came looking for the next king. But purpose called David out from the fields, and no one could deny him what God had ordained. In the same way, When it's her time, God will call her out, and everyone who doubted her will have to witness her rise. Let me give you an example. Imagine a young woman applying for job after job in her field. She has the skills, the degree, and the passion, but she keeps getting rejection letters. Months pass by, and she starts to wonder if she'll ever get a breakthrough. Instead of giving up, she keeps praying, sharpening her gifts, and trusting God. One day, a company that never even posted a job opening reaches out to her. Someone had seen her work, remembered her name, and recommended her. Not only does she get the position, but it's a role that exceeds everything she had imagined. Looking back, she realizes the earlier rejections weren't failures. They were divine protection. God was keeping her available for the opportunity that was truly hers. Her purpose could not be denied. This is how God works. When He fights for a woman, He ensures that her destiny unfolds exactly as He planned. She doesn't have to manipulate her way into rooms or compromise her values to get ahead. She only has to walk in obedience, and God will place her where she needs to be. Her purpose is bigger than opinions, stronger than opposition, and greater than any obstacle. So when you see a woman rising despite the odds, when you see her thriving after being counted out, know this: it is not luck. It is not chance. It is not favoritism. It is the hand of God. Her purpose was written long before anyone doubted her. And no power in hell can deny what heaven has declared. That is what it means when we say her purpose cannot be denied. So hear me today. When God fights for a woman, she cannot be defeated, delayed, or denied. Her story becomes a testimony. Her pain becomes power. And her struggles become a setup for a greater glory. If you're that woman, hold your head high. If you know that woman, encourage her. Because heaven has declared, this battle is not yours, but the Lord's.